Welcome to the mysterious casebook. In the gaslit hush of Baker Street, a knock echoed with no hand to give it. A mystery unfolds, dark, strange, and uninvited. Pour yourself something warm and let the mystery begin. The sound came like a solitary tap, not a fist nor a knuckle, but a single, deliberate pressure against the wood of our Baker Street door. I glanced up from the lancet and caught Holmes already rising, his eyes narrowed, body angling toward the faint echo with the curiosity of a hound catching scent. "Watson," he murmured, "did you note the absence of articulation in that knock?" Before I could reply, the door creaked inward of its own accord, revealing not a figure, but a shadow, long bent and oddly jerking in rhythm with the gaslight from the hall. Then a man appeared, or rather what remained of him. He wore a fine Inverness cape, though slightly out of fashion, and a scarf tucked tight around his throat. But it was the stump, clean, cloth-bound where his left hand should be, that struck the first chord of silence between us. Holmes did not offer a greeting. Instead, he gestured toward the settee with an open palm, his face unreadable. The man entered like a man entering a tomb. His shoes made no noise on the rug, and when he sat, it was with the stillness of someone who'd practiced stillness for far too long. "I trust," he began, his voice reedy but controlled, "that your reputation for discretion is not exaggerated." Holmes inclined his head. "You arrived without introduction, but your knock was eloquent." The visitor's remaining hand trembled slightly as he withdrew a small envelope from his inner pocket and placed it on the table between us. "It arrived 3 days ago," he said, "at my club. No address, no signature. Just this line inside, 'I saw what you buried by the pier.'" Holmes leaned forward, not touching the envelope, but observing its fold and fray with minute interest. The oral motif returned the faint groan of the floorboards beneath our chairs, like something shifting beneath still water. "You have a past," Holmes said gently, "and it has recently grown restless." "I was in the service," the man said. "Colonial intelligence. I retired 10 years ago." Quietly, "There was an incident in Malta." His eyes met mine, then flicked back to Holmes. "You may believe I deserve whatever's coming. I'm not here to seek absolution." Holmes steepled his fingers. "You're here because the past doesn't knock unless it knows where to find the door." The man's shoulders slackened. 2 days after the envelope arrived, I received a telephone call. No voice, just breathing. Then the sound of waves. I haven't slept since. Holmes turned to me abruptly. "Watson, how often do waves precede the tide, I beg your pardon?" He was already on his feet, moving toward the window, his attention darting from the soot-streaked glass to the coat stand. A buried object, a pier, a listener who sends sound instead of speech, a man who has not slept. The man rose too. "My club is the Athenaeum. I've taken a room at Claridge's under an assumed name." "Wise," Holmes said, "though not sufficient." A moment passed where nothing moved. Then the wind outside caught the window panes with a faint rattle, like fingertips dragging across glass. "I am being watched, Mr. Holmes." "Then they are no longer concerned with secrecy. Only timing." I stepped forward. "You mentioned something buried. What was it?" The visitor's lips parted, but no words emerged. He pressed his good hand to his chest, then shook his head. "Not yet. You'll understand when you see the pier." Holmes nodded, more to himself than to either of us. "We'll need to visit the location at first light. Bring your original military dossier and any correspondence you retained." The man hesitated, then offered a thin nod. "You'll come?" "We already have," Holmes said, and I noticed his coat was already over his arm. As the visitor turned to go, his coat brushed a book from the side table. It fell with a soft thud, spine down, fluttering open on the rug. Holmes stooped to retrieve it, his fingers pausing on the open page. "Browning," he murmured. "My last Duchess sits looking as if she were alive." Curious choice. The man didn't answer. He closed the door behind him with the same soundless finality with which he'd entered. Holmes remained still, head slightly cocked. "Watson," he said softly, "did you note his shoes?" "I did. They were polished, but damp. Not just damp, salt-worn." The silence stretched. Then the same sound returned, that faint, unplaceable knock. Only this time the visitor had gone. Holmes crossed to the door and opened it upon empty hallway shadows. There was no echo of descending steps, no rustle of a retreating coat. Only the bare flick of a gas sconce near the stairwell, its flame ticking gently against the glass, the oral motif reasserting itself like a whisper trying to be heard. "Salt-worn," Holmes repeated under his breath. "Yet the pier is nowhere near Claridge's, nor within the fog-walk of the Athenaeum." He turned and held up the envelope the visitor had left behind. "Watson, gloves." I fetched the tweezers from the sideboard. Holmes grasped the edge of the envelope delicately and slid out the note, a single piece of ivory paper, folded without creases. He tilted it beneath the lamp. The writing was precise, old-fashioned cursive, ink slightly blotted at the corners. "I saw what you buried by the pier." "No smudging, no hesitation," Holmes said, "written with care, likely by someone accustomed to penmanship under pressure." Naval officer? Or a clerk in wartime dispatch? "What do you make of the phrasing?" I asked. He lifted his eyes. "Not 'I know,' not 'I saw you,' but 'I saw what you buried.' The emphasis is on the object, not the act." Outside, a cab rattled past, the horse's hooves striking in rhythm with the whisper of the gaslight. Holmes's gaze had not moved from the note. Burial implies guilt or concealment. But this man, whatever his past, is less concerned with discovery than with interpretation. He's not afraid of being unmasked. He's afraid of being misunderstood. Or misrepresented, I suggested. Precisely. It is not fear of exposure, but of narrative. He handed me the note and moved to the mantel, where he lit his pipe without flower. The hiss of the flame punctuated the silence like a private warning. "I shall require you to accompany me tomorrow morning, Watson. I'd like your impressions of the pier. Bring your revolver." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you expect trouble?" "Trouble?" Holmes exhaled a long, thoughtful breath. "No, but I expect a silence that has waited a decade to speak, and such silences do not always articulate themselves peacefully." I tucked the note into a fresh envelope for our case files, marking the time in my journal. Holmes paced. His motion was soft but deliberate, the floor creaking just once beneath the weight of a step angled near the hearth. "There's another matter," he said. "Did you hear the knock?" I did. "Describe it." "Single pressure. No repetition. No knuckle. More like a push." "Precisely," he said. "Not a rap nor a call for entry. A touch. Almost intimate, as though the door itself were being remembered." His tone unsettled me. I shifted. "You think the message was already known to him?" "I think the message wasn't meant for him," Holmes replied. "I think it was meant for the door." We let that sit between us like a question we weren't prepared to phrase. The following morning broke without ceremony. Fog had settled low, clinging to the knees of passers-by like a child unwilling to let go. The pier in question was one I recognized as a long-abandoned structure just beyond Lambeth, frequented more by gulls than men. As we walked the final stretch, the boards beneath us groaned that same motif again, sharpened by sea mist and the distant clang of a ship's bell. Holmes paused abruptly, kneeling near the edge where the salt air turned bitter. "Observe," he said, pointing to the wood grain, Scoring here a short blade, likely a folding knife, and here scrapings from a small spade or trowel. The surface has been disturbed recently. He pressed his fingers to the wood, then sniffed. Camphor oil. I knelt beside him. Used in preservation. Used in concealment, he corrected. The scent lingers when one wishes to mask others. Blood, for instance, or rot. My stomach turned. Holmes rose, back left piling, loose by a fraction of an inch. Let's see if our friend buried sentiment or sin. With the edge of his walking stick he pried it loose. Beneath, wrapped in oilskin, was a small metal tin, dented but sealed. Holmes extracted it. No lock. Inside a length of lace, yellowed with age, a silver locket, and a half-burnt photograph. He handed the photograph to me. The image was fogged at the edges, but the central figure was distinct, a young woman with a seaman's cap in her lap, and her eyes fixed not at the camera, but at something just beyond. Holmes tapped the corner of the photograph. Royal Naval insignia, early 1890s, and this lace wedding trim, torn. He closed the tin and returned it to its wrapping. "So the object wasn't contraband," I murmured. "It was a memory." Holmes nodded, and the person who saw it buried wishes to exhume more than evidence. They wish to exhume blame. A gull cried above us, its wings slicing the air, with a sound that felt too deliberate to be wild. "Return with me, Watson," Holmes said, his voice low. "I believe someone has already noticed our interference." I turned. A shape, not moving, merely watching, stood where the fog met the railing. But when I blinked, it was gone. Holmes's hand caught my shoulder before I'd taken a step. His eyes remained fixed on the vapor where the figure had stood, though the fog had swallowed all but the memory of movement. "No chase," he said sharply. "Not yet." I drew a breath. "You believe they were waiting?" "No," he murmured. "They were watching not to interrupt, but to observe. That suggests confidence or desperation." A gull wheeled overhead, crying once, before vanishing into the murk. The sound clung in the air, that hollow, circling tone, as if the pier itself were listening. We turned back. The tin sealed once more in its oilskin and secured in Holmes's coat. The boards groaned in long, protesting vowels beneath our steps. In the cab, Holmes stared through the fog-streaked glass, as though mapping the city beneath it. "The woman in the photograph," he began, "was not gazing into the lens. She was looking to her left, deliberately avoiding the photographer." I frowned. A candid moment, perhaps. Unlikely? Her posture was formal. What she avoided was not the camera, but the man behind it. He tapped his fingers on the frame. "Let us suppose she was once connected to our visitor, possibly a fiancé, perhaps more. The lace, the locket, romantic emblems preserved, not discarded." I nodded. "And the burial at the pier?" "A secret," Holmes said simply, "not for concealment, but for safekeeping. The hiding of sentiment, not guilt. But someone witnessed it, and now seeks to rewrite the memory through threat." The wheels rattled, a loose screw in the doorframe, adding a rhythmic jingle to the journey. Holmes's gaze sharpened at the sound. "I fear, Watson," he said, "that this may not be blackmail in the conventional sense." "Then what?" "A seduction of guilt, a calculated attempt to lure a man back into a story he thought had ended." We alighted at Baker Street just as the church bells to the north rang at noon. The sound echoed faintly down the row, each peal absorbed by brick and soot. Holmes stopped on the threshold. "The knock," he said. "The door felt it, but so did the house." I gave him a look. He clarified. "Our flat has certain acoustics." The knock light resonated through the woodwork. That means pressure was applied with remarkable precision. Either our visitor knew the exact point of contact or someone else knocked in his place. Back inside, Holmes went directly to his files and withdrew a slim folder marked VSC, Victorian Seamen's Club. He spread a yellowing register before us. 10 years ago, I investigated a dockside fire. Accidental, but during the search, we encountered a sailor with a prosthetic limb and a taste for anonymity. He flipped a page. Here, Jonathan Merrow, former Royal Naval Intelligence, retired in 1891, reported missing by his club in 93, reappeared a month later, hand-gone, speech-impaired, memory suspect. Merrow, I repeated, but our visitor introduced himself as Gregory Alston. He did not introduce himself at all, Holmes reminded me. We assumed the identity from his story, but if he is Merrow, and he vanished once before, then the disappearance was likely voluntary. I turned to the note again. Then who sent this? Someone else who knew about the pier? Holmes's eyes narrowed. Someone who believes the pier held more than mementos. A low rattle interrupted us, not from outside, but within. I turned. Our letter flap had shuddered. Holmes crossed in 2 strides and retrieved a folded note that had been slid through with deliberate stealth. No postage. No writing on the outside. He unfolded it. The photograph was not the first. He handed it to me without comment. The paper was identical to the first note. Same ink, same hand. Holmes moved to the window, parting the curtain with one finger. There, he said. Across the street. 3rd window from the right. The curtain dropped just as we turned. I peered out. The building opposite was a boarding house, its facade dulled with rain, but the windows clean. The 3rd-floor curtain fluttered faintly. I've rented from that house before, Holmes muttered. Transient clientele, actors, ex-military, those who favour shadows over stability. His pipe was already lit again, the scratch of the match loud in the hush. The smoke curled into the air like a visual echo of our thoughts. 2 messages. 1 witness. A buried object that is not contraband. And a man who knocks without fingers. He took a final puff. Watson, how long has it been since we visited the Hall of Mirrors at Vauxhall? Years, I said. It closed. Holmes's eyes gleamed. No, it was merely privately funded and opened by appointment only. I frowned. You think this connects? I think this case is not about what was buried, he said. It is about how it was seen. The doorframe creaked softly. The floor gave another of its slow, wooden groans. Somewhere beneath the boards a pipe hissed, with the pressure of water adjusting course. Then a second knock, this one lower, slower, came against the back door, the servant's entrance. Holmes's finger pressed silently to his lips. He stepped toward the back hallway with the calm of a surgeon approaching a tremor. The sound repeated slower this time, more weight than rhythm. A dull push. 1. Pause. Then nothing. I reached instinctively for the revolver in the drawer, but Holmes waved me off. He unlatched the side door and opened it just enough to let the lamplight bleed into the narrow alley beyond. The space was empty, save for a square of dark fabric folded neatly on the step. Holmes stooped, examined it without touching, and motioned me forward. A pocket square, I said, crouching beside him. Monogrammed, not just monogrammed. Holmes pointed. The thread has frayed the bottom left corner. The initials were stitched in silver JM. Holmes lifted it with the tip of his cane, held it to his nose, and inhaled. Coal smoke, grease, a trace of camphor again, and something else. He hesitated. Lavender water. The variety is sold only by Harrods on Curzon Street. I blinked. That narrows it. Indeed. No more than 30 gentlemen in London still purchase this particular formulation, one discontinued after the war due to cost. Whoever left this knows I would recognize it. The wind picked up in the narrow corridor, rustling a loose paper against the wall like a breath held too long. Holmes stepped out, scanned the alley, and returned with the square folded and pinned delicately with a toothpick to the edge of the mantel. "We are being prompted," he said, "not coerced. Our opponent does not act in haste. They want us to understand something gradually. Then why the back door? Because the front door demands presence. The back door invites absence. Whoever knocked wants us to feel the distinction." We returned to the sitting room. Holmes stood before the tin once more, now laid open on the table. He extracted the photograph again and turned it over. On the back, etched faintly in pencil, was a date, 12th of March, 1893. He tapped it. "Watson, what occurred in March of '93?" I furrowed my brow. "The Marchioness trial, and the explosion at Tilbury Docks. You were consulting on the latter?" Holmes's voice was low, and Nero, if our visitor is indeed, he vanished that same month. He paced. The boards groaned again, long and soft, as if answering. "There's a pattern here, Watson. Time is being used like a scalpel, each detail from that month being reopened." I glanced at the note. The photograph was not the first. "You think there are more buried items?" "Not buried, dispersed, like chapters of a book hidden in plain sight, waiting to be read aloud." A knock came again, but this time from upstairs. Holmes's head snapped toward the ceiling. "Third floor. Empty since Mrs. Parkins left last month. No tenants, no access without key or lockpick." We ascended together. The stair groaned under my foot. Holmes's step made no sound at all. At the landing, he turned the knob unlocked. The room beyond was cold, its fireplace dormant. Dust clung to the sills in a soft, undisturbed film. But there, placed dead center on the floor, was a single shoe. A man's Oxford. Scuffed, damp. Holmes knelt. Left shoe. The treads worn unevenly, slightly limp. Mud traced with salt residue. This man has walked recently along the shore, but inland enough to have picked up London soot as well. "No note this time," I said. "No, the note is the shoe." He picked it up carefully, studied the heel. Inside, pressed to the lining, was a matchbook. He opened it. Only one match remained, and written across the inner flap, "Strand Gasworks. Tonight." Before the 12th chime, I checked my watch, 8:10. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Enough time. We descended in silence. The sound of our steps, the soft tread, the faint creak, played like a counterpoint to the wind rattling the panes behind us. "Why a gasworks?" I asked, as we hailed a cab. "Because light and combustion are opposites," he said. "This is about visibility, Watson, and illusion." The streets blurred past as Holmes outlined his thoughts with the brisk rhythm of clarity under pressure. The buried object at the pier, the notes, the knock, each is a summons but also a riddle. I nodded. And the shoe? A signal, a choice. Either we go to the gasworks and accept the next piece, or we remain observers and let the game be played without us. He leaned forward. "We won't be alone tonight." The cab slowed as the looming shape of the Strand Gasworks came into view, its chimneys stacked black against the lighter clouds. Pipes hissed, valves ticked. The entire structure emitted a subtle pressure, like a lung waiting to exhale. Then through the hum came the first chime of the clock tower across the Thames. Holmes was out of the cab before the second chime, his feet striking the cobbles without a word. I followed close behind, my breath fogging in the cold air as we skirted the south wall of the gasworks. The third chime rang deeper here, as if caught and echoed by the vast metal belly of the gasometer above. The main gate was padlocked, but Holmes produced a thin sliver of steel from his coat and made quick work of the latch. The fourth chime sang out as we slipped into the compound, swallowed by shadows and the low hiss of escaping pressure from unseen valves. "There," he whispered, pointing. A figure stood near the base of the central stack, motionless, half shrouded in the gaslight's wavering beam. They made no effort to conceal themselves nor to approach. "Single hand," Holmes muttered. "Same coat, same posture." I stepped forward, but Holmes held me back. "Let them speak first." The fifth chime rang. Then softly, a voice unmistakable despite its tremor. "You weren't meant to see the shoe." Holmes's voice was quiet, and yet it was polished with care, meant to be seen, perhaps, but not taken. The man shifted. I saw now it was indeed our visitor, though his scarf was gone and his mouth drawn in a curious, almost wistful expression. "I never sent the second note," he said, "or the square, or this appointment." "You were summoned too," Holmes said. He nodded. "It's the girl. She won't rest." The sixth chime. I stepped forward. "You buried her photograph, her locket, and lace beneath the pier." "Why?" His eyes flicked to me. "Because I loved her, because I had to let her go." Holmes's gaze never left the man's face. "Her name?" The man hesitated. "Marjorie Bell." The seventh chime. Holmes's tone shifted sharper now. "She drowned at sea. Tilbury, 1893. A training vessel explosion. She was a steward's assistant." The man inhaled once, sharply. "You've seen the report? I read it years ago," Holmes said. "There was a second body recovered, a man with naval tattoos and a scar above the brow." "Frederick Lang," the man murmured. "She'd promised to marry me, but she sailed with him." "And you buried the remnants," Holmes said, "to remember her as you'd wished, not as she was." The eighth chime. A clatter rang out from behind the southern pipe stack. Holmes spun. Another figure stepped forward, taller, leaner, gloved in both hands, and wearing a dark bowler pulled low over the brow. "Evening, Mr. Merrow," the man said. Our visitor recoiled. "You!" Holmes stepped between them. "A friend of yours?" Merrow's voice cracked. "He was the ship's quartermaster, Lang's bunkmate. He told me she was forced aboard." "Lied." "I did what I had to," the man replied coldly. "Lang had enemies. She was caught in it." The ninth chime. Holmes raised a hand. "And you sent the messages?" "No," the man said. "Not all. Just the note. The rest someone else has their hands on the past." "Why summon us?" I asked. "I didn't. The matchbook came to me anonymously, just like it did to you. We've all been called." The 10th chime. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "We're standing on a stage, gentlemen. The roles have been cast." Footsteps echoed rapidly, purposefully. A boy, no older than 12, darted into view, breathless. He held out an envelope to Holmes. "Mr. H., I was paid to bring this right before midnight." Holmes opened it. A single line, "You buried the wrong truth." He turned to the boy. "Who gave you this?" The boy pointed vaguely toward the embankment. "Man in a grey coat. Said you'd understand." The 11th chime. Holmes's jaw tensed. "This is not vengeance. It's narrative reconstruction. Someone is writing the past, one piece at a time." Merrow staggered back, pressing his handless arm to his chest. "They know." "No," Holmes said, "they suspect. And they're gambling that suspicion will cause a confession." The final chime began, sonorous, long. A gunshot cracked the air. The report of the pistol echoed through the iron belly of the gasworks, reverberating off every pipe and hollow chamber, until it seemed the building itself had fired the shot. I ducked instinctively. Holmes was already moving. "Stay behind me, Watson!" Merrow staggered, clutching his shoulder. The quartermaster, his face half lit by the trembling flame of a nearby valve, lowered the revolver with a kind of grim astonishment, as if unsure his own finger had pulled the trigger. The boy screamed and fled into the fog. Holmes leapt forward, striking the weapon aside with his cane. It clattered across the floor, sliding into the dark where the hiss of gas swallowed its sound. The motif lingered, a low wheeze, like a dying breath from the machinery around us. "Holmes, he's bleeding!" I tore open Merrow's coat. The wound was clean through the shoulder, not fatal, It's a graze, then he'll live, Holmes said, binding it quickly with his handkerchief. His tone, however, was fixed on the other man. You hesitated, quartermaster. Your aim was not for the heart. The man's chest heaved. He deserved worse. He left her to drown, Merrow's voice rasped. You lie. You told me she was already. Holmes's shout sliced between them. Enough. You've both been played. The air tightened with silence. Even the pipes seemed to pause, their hiss diminishing to a thin, suspenseful note. Holmes stooped and retrieved the revolver with a gloved hand. This is no service weapon. New issue, civilian, the kind sold through pawn houses in 7 dials. Whoever supplied it wanted an expendable outcome, one death or another. He gestured toward the corner. Watson, the light. I struck a match, the flame trembling in the draught. Holmes examined the floor. 2 sets of footprints, one ours, one fresh, thin-soled, feminine, almost weightless. She was here, he murmured. Merrow blinked through pain. Who? The ghost you both fear, Holmes said, not Marjorie's spirit, her witness. The woman in the photograph was not Marjorie Bell at all. The words landed with the quiet weight of revelation. I stared. Then who, Holmes, lifted the photograph under the matchlight? Note the mole beneath the right eye. The actual Marjorie had none. This woman was older, her face composed, a decoy portrait intended to memorialize the wrong person, to obscure a substitution. The quartermaster's expression collapsed into confusion. Substitution. Precisely, Holmes replied. The explosion at Tilbury destroyed more than lives. It erased identities. The real Marjorie Bell survived and vanished under an assumed name, likely aided by one of you, which I suspect is the reason for tonight's performance. A faint creak from the catwalk above drew his gaze upward. The motif returned, whispering through the pipes like a drawn breath. Holmes raised his voice. You've gone to extraordinary trouble to retell a tragedy, madam. Come down. A pause, then the sound of slow, deliberate steps descending the metal stairs. She appeared through the dim gaslight of a woman wrapped in a seaman's coat, her hair pinned low, her face composed yet haunted. Her gloved right hand rested on the rail, the other sleeve hung empty. Merrow's lips parted. Marjorie, she regarded him with quiet sadness. You buried the lie, Jonathan. I buried the truth. Holmes's eyes softened. You sent the messages. Yes, she said. I had to. I needed you both to see what your silence made of me. Merrow took a faltering step. You were dead. I was alive because of him, she said, nodding faintly toward the quartermaster. He pulled me from the water. You fled. You left us to burn, Holmes interjected gently. And you hid? I hid behind another woman's name, she said. The one who truly died that night. I buried her locket under the pier so she might be remembered by someone. But when I heard that Jonathan had built his piece on the lie, I could no longer rest. The quartermaster's voice shook. You made me part of your deception. You made yourself part of it, she replied. You told him I was dead to spare your own guilt. Holmes stepped forward, his tone almost kind. And the knock at my door, madam? I could not face him, she said, but I could announce myself. The motif sounded again, a faint hiss through a leaking valve, steady, rhythmic, like the beating of an artificial heart. Holmes glanced toward it. Watson, do you hear that frequency? I nodded. It's irregular. Deliberate, Holmes said. Someone's opened a release line. The woman's eyes widened. I didn't. Holmes seized her arm, pulling her back. Move! A gout of flame burst from a ruptured pipe behind the stack. Heat tore through the chamber. The quartermaster shielded Merrow as I dragged both toward the exit. Holmes turned the valve with a wrenching motion, his sleeve catching a lick of fire before he extinguished it with his coat. The echo of the explosion rolled outward in a hollow roar. We stumbled into the cold night air. Smoke trailed upward like a black banner above the gasworks. Holmes stood last, his silhouette framed by the broken doorway. He turned to us. "Someone lit that line remotely," he said, "which means there's still another hand in this affair." A single, echoing knock came from somewhere deep within the structure, one long, hollow pulse. Holmes was already turning back toward the blackened doorway. "That knock didn't come from any of us," he said, "which means someone is still inside." I moved to follow, but he lifted a hand. "Wait here. If I'm not out in 3 minutes, you'll be out," I said, and pressed the revolver into his hand. The last trace of flame from the ruptured pipe hissed against the damp brickwork as Holmes slipped inside, swallowed again by shadow. From outside, I could hear the rhythm of his steps, soft, controlled moving deeper into the mechanical belly of the gasworks. Each footfall was punctuated by the motif of a subtle shift of pressure in the pipes, a slow exhalation like the breath of something vast and watching. Marjorie stood with her arms crossed, her empty sleeve fluttering slightly in the wind. Nero leaned against a support beam, pale but upright. Neither spoke. From within, a metallic clang rang out, followed by silence. I tensed. Then Holmes's voice called sharply, "Watson, a lantern now!" I darted to the wall where an emergency light was still bracketed above a valve box. The wick caught with a sputter, casting a cone of unsteady glow, and I followed the echoes. He stood near the main combustion chamber, which was shut tight but blackened by recent smoke. His hand rested on the door latch, but his attention was fixed on a panel to the right, a maintenance hatch slightly ajar. "There," he said, "look." Inside the chamber lay a small wire rig, delicate, surgical in its precision. The remnants of a slow fuse system, now blackened and diffused, dangled from a rusted pipe. But what caught the eye was what lay beside it, a child's handkerchief, neatly folded and pinned with a silver brooch. Holmes did not touch it. A woman's accessory, but a child's token. This wasn't meant to destroy. It was meant to symbolize. I frowned. "A warning?" "No," he said softly. "A memory." He drew back and turned toward me. Our intruder knew exactly how long to delay the fuse, enough for us to find each other, enough for that knock to land after the explosion had spent its force. They wanted to be heard, not to kill. I gestured to the brooch. "What does it mean?" "It's a mourning piece," Holmes said. "Mid-Victorian design. Hairwork sealed in glass. The initials M.B. Again, Marjorie Bell. But she's alive. Yes, which means someone is mourning the version of her that no longer exists." He turned back to the hatch and lifted a strand of thread from the hinge. Red wool. Frayed. Naval standard, likely from a cadet's scarf. I stared. The boy who delivered the message," Holmes said. "He didn't just appear at random. He's connected to a grandson, a ward, perhaps someone adopted into silence." The hiss in the pipes rose again, faint but persistent. Holmes tilted his head. "Someone's left the line open," he said, deliberately. We emerged back into the courtyard. The others looked up. Holmes addressed Marjorie directly. "The handkerchief in the chamber, did you leave it?" She shook her head slowly. "No. Then we have an artist in our midst," he said. "One who stages memory in place of violence. Someone who believes grief should be reenacted to be understood." Nero's voice was hoarse. "Then who? Who is doing this?" Holmes turned to him, face unreadable. "Who did Marjorie visit, Mr. Nero, after the explosion? Who hid her?" Nero's jaw twitched. "There was an old seaman, Dunford. She trusted him. Still alive? I think so. Blind now, he keeps to himself. Water Lane near the docks." Holmes looked at me. "We go now." Marjorie stepped forward. "Let me come." "No," Holmes said, his voice gentle. "You've already given enough of your truth. What remains must be confronted by those who carried the silence." She did not argue. as we hailed another cab and rolled southward toward the murky edge of the river. Holmes fell silent, hands clasped beneath his chin. "Watson," he said finally, "there's a pattern in these interventions, a choreography. Every event, the photograph, the knock, the shoe, has been timed with the kind of care only an observer could maintain, someone who watched all these years but never acted until now." "And now?" I asked. "Now they want it all remembered, or relieved." The cab rattled down a narrow alley. The driver pointed, "Number 26, Water Lane." We stepped out. A faint note of salt hung in the air. Somewhere in the dark a bellbuoy clanged once low and mournful. Holmes raised his hand to knock. But the door was already ajar. Holmes didn't hesitate. With a finger to his lips, he pushed the door open fully and stepped inside, the hinges giving a soft groan that merged seamlessly into the hush of the dim hallway. The motif returned a faint hiss from the cracked window above the stairwell, air weaving through broken seals like breath through parted lips. I followed, revolver low. The house was narrow, its wallpaper yellowed and peeling, its corners softened by dust, but there was no disarray, no panic. Everything appeared arranged, not lived in, but preserved. "Light," Holmes murmured. I struck a match. The flame flickered against a row of maritime sketches pinned above a writing desk, ships, rigging diagrams, faces, one unmistakably Marjorie Bell's, though drawn with a younger hand and a softer jaw. The floorboards creaked above us. Holmes turned toward the staircase. "Stay behind," he whispered. "And listen, that sounds like a prosthetic step. Do you hear it?" Indeed, the rhythm was unsteady, one heel solid, the next dragging faintly, as though the feet were not flesh but wood or steel. Holmes ascended first, silent as breath. I followed. The sound paused, then resumed. At the landing, he raised his hand and turned the knob. The room beyond was lit only by a coal stove's dying glow. A man sat in a wheeled chair beside the hearth, turned away from us. One hand rested on the armrest, long-fingered, age-spotted, unmoving. The other sleeve was pinned neatly beneath the lapel. "Mr. Dunford?" Holmes said, voice steady. There was no reply. Then, after a moment, the man's head turned just enough to reveal his left profile, an eye patch over one eye, the other milky with cataract. "You're late," he said, voice sandpapery. "You knew we'd come?" Holmes asked. "I knew someone would." She said it had to happen this way. No shouting, no trials, just the truth, like oil across water. Holmes stepped closer. "You raised her?" "I gave her silence," he said. "She gave me purpose." The wind pushed faintly at the window pane, the glass quivering, with that now familiar tremble, the house breathing again. "Mr. Dunford," Holmes said gently, "you've orchestrated this case not as a criminal, but as a—" The knocks, the notes, the objects, each one timed, each one weighted with memory. The man's mouth curved slightly. She wanted it quiet. I made it theatrical. "Why now?" "She's dying," Dunford whispered. "Cancer in the lungs. She didn't want to tell them, didn't want pity, but she wanted them to know who they'd been to her." Holmes was silent for a moment. "So you performed her grief and made them walk back through it. Not to punish, but to feel." Dunford gave a shallow nod. Nero was her beginning. The quartermaster was her betrayal, and I was at her end. I stepped forward. "And the explosion? What really happened?" "She ran," Dunford said. "There was a quarrel on board when Lang was drunk. A candle tipped. She warned them. They ignored her. She dove into the water before it went up. Nero never saw. The others died." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And the body they thought was hers?" "Another girl, similar build. No one questioned it. Marjorie disappeared into the void they made for her." Holmes turned to the fireplace. Above it hung a faded photograph in a tin frame. Not the woman we'd seen before, not a portrait, but a candid image of her laughing on a dock, a gull mid-flight behind her. The emotion was real. The hair is unkempt. The truth is intact. "She made you promise to keep her hidden," Holmes said. "Yes," Dunford whispered, "until she chose to be seen again." There was a pause, long but not empty. The silence settled like a conclusion being accepted. "She's waiting," Holmes said. "She doesn't know you've told us, does she?" Dunford shook his head. Holmes laid a hand on the man's good shoulder. "Then let us tell her." We descended. The house felt smaller now, less haunted. Outside, the fog had thinned. The cab waited. As Holmes climbed in, he paused. "There's one piece left, Watson. One note in this symphony he didn't write." I followed his gaze. There, tucked under the driver's seat, was another envelope. Unmarked, unfolded. Inside a single playing card is the Queen of Hearts. Holmes turned it over. Scrawled in a child's shaky hand, "You still forgot me." Holmes held the Queen of Hearts up to the lantern light, the card fluttering slightly in the cold air. Its edges were worn, its surface smudged, as if it had passed through many hands. The writing on the back, childish, unpracticed, tugged at something behind his eyes. Not a surprise, exactly. Recognition, perhaps. Or regret. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he turned the card slowly in his fingers, twice, then tucked it carefully into his coat. "Driver," he said, "how long has this been under your seat?" The man blinked. "I didn't notice it, sir. Picked up no one since tea hour." "Strange, that." "Strange indeed," Holmes muttered. "It was planted." I leaned in. "By whom?" He looked at me sharply. "By someone small enough to place it without being seen. Someone who knew we'd find it once the rest of the case had quieted." The narrative isn't complete, Watson, not because of what was done, but because of who was left out. "You mean the boy?" "No, not the one who delivered the message. Another child." He leaned back in the cab as it rattled forward. "Think, Watson, the Queen of Hearts is a card of love and betrayal, but in a child's hand it takes on another tone of yearning, absence. The note said, 'You still forgot me.'" Holmes nodded. "The phrasing matters. 'Now you forgot me still,' which implies repetition. This child was overlooked before, perhaps twice. We rode in silence for several minutes. I could hear the ticking of Holmes's thumbnail against his cane, the rhythm steady, then halting. He looked up. Marjorie had no child of her own, officially. But if she vanished in '93 and survived, it's not impossible she bore one during her absence, or before it. "Whose?" I asked, though I feared the answer. Holmes's jaw tightened. Merrow's, perhaps, or Lang's. Either way, a living consequence that had no place in the stories the adults chose to remember. We arrived at the modest boarding house near the Victoria Embankment where Marjorie had taken refuge. Holmes did not knock. He stepped straight inside. The door had been left ajar again. The motif greeted us at once, that faint hiss of wind across floorboards, punctuated now by the rhythmic ticking of a small metronome from a side room. Marjorie sat by the hearth, a shawl drawn around her shoulders. She did not rise, nor startle. "I was expecting you," she said. Holmes held out the card. She blinked. Once. He found it. "Who?" Holmes asked. "My son," she said. "I never told anyone, not even Dunford. I had him 6 months after the explosion in Ramsgate under another name. I placed him with a widow who ran a school. I visited sometimes, less after a while." And then I stopped. Her hands tightened around the shawl. "He never forgave me." "You left him completely?" I asked, barely able to mask the shock. "I left the version of me he thought existed," she said. "It was safer. He'd have been targeted otherwise by those who still sought Lang, or me. Holmes stepped closer. You said he found it. The card, the knock, the photograph. All time to pull the past into the light. Those were not your doing. No, she said, just the first letter. The rest came from him. Holmes nodded slowly. So the memory staging, the fire trap, the brooch, all orchestrated by a child grown into a watchful, wounded mind. She nodded. He draws, always did. He sketches ships, faces. He watches people, from rooftops, alley windows. Once he posted a drawing of the house I was in from the chimney. Holmes murmured, a boy on the roof, a child overlooked but never absent. Her eyes glistened. I tried to forget for his sake, but he remembered mine. The room fell quiet again. Even the metronome had ceased. Then a creak upstairs. Holmes turned. Stay here. We ascended slowly. The hallway above was narrow, the door at the end ajar. Holmes pushed it wider with his cane. A single candle flickered on a crate. A folded blanket, a worn satchel, and pages, dozens of them, littered the floor. Drawings, all in charcoal and ink. Scenes of the pier, the explosion, our faces, even the moment of the knock at Baker Street rendered from angles no one could have seen. Unless they had been watching all along. Holmes knelt and lifted one sheet, a boy's view, from behind the curtain of the third-floor window, across from 221B. He's been chronicling the entire case, I breathed. Holmes didn't speak. Instead, he pointed to a final drawing pinned to the far wall. It showed a hand reaching for a door, not knocking, just touching. The fingers were small, and missing one. Holmes stared at the drawing for a long moment, then ran his finger beneath the edge of the paper. It had been affixed with melted wax, carefully positioned, as though not to be seen first, but last. The charcoal lines were precise, almost delicate. A boy's hand, palm flat to a door, one finger missing the ring finger. Watson, he murmured, this wasn't merely observation, this was a confession. I stepped beside him. Then the boy was there the night of the fire? Holmes nodded slowly. Not as a witness alone. As a participant, perhaps the last one to touch the door before it closed. He lifted the satchel gently. Inside were more pages, some torn, others folded with childlike care. Beneath them, a small tin box. He opened it. Inside lay a fingertip, dried, preserved. Not more than a fragment, but the nail still intact, and a bit of red wool thread tied round its base like a makeshift charm. I recoiled. Dear God, Holmes's eyes didn't waver. It wasn't lost in an accident. It was offered. A beat passed, then the sound again, the sigh of the wind, through the cracked frame, as though the house itself mourned. The motif returning, steady, regretful. He held the box up to the light. He left this not to horrify us, but to complete the story, to show what was sacrificed. Why the ring finger? I asked, my voice low. Holmes turned the tin over. On the bottom, scrawled faintly in pencil, was the name Marjorie Lang. I blinked. He took her name. Holmes met my gaze. He was Lang's child, not Merrow's, conceived in secrecy, hidden in fear. She gave him to Dunford, but when the fire consumed the rest, she chose to let the world believe she died as well. And the boy grew up inside the echo of it. He watched from rooftops, alleyways, cracks in doorframes. He was never told who he was, only who he wasn't. Holmes's voice lowered, and when he realized the truth, he gave up a part of himself physically, as if to sever what he'd never been allowed to claim. He turned to the window. This was never a case of murder, Watson. It was a theatre of memory. Each note, each knock, each item, a curated pain drawn in acts. But why draw us in? I asked. Holmes folded the drawings carefully. Because he needed witnesses who would see, not just observe. He needed to be interpreted, not found. He moved toward the wall, examining the surrounding papers. Then, slowly, he lifted a final envelope, taped to the underside of the sill. Unsealed. Inside was a single scrap of parchment, and on it the same childlike hand had written, "He told me the fire was my fault. I thought if I made enough noise, someone might hear her screaming." I felt my chest tighten. Holmes exhaled slowly. "Dunford." "He lied to the boy?" "No," Holmes said. "Worse." He let him believe it. The floorboards creaked behind us. We turned. Marjorie stood in the doorway, pale and breathless. She had followed us. Her gaze fell to the tin in Holmes's hand, then to the drawing. Her face did not change. "I knew," she said softly. But I couldn't bear to say it. Not to him. Not even to myself. "He's not here now," Holmes said gently. "Yes, he is," she replied, her voice barely audible. "He never left. He's been here all along." She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the cot, staring at the drawing on the wall. I heard him sometimes. In the stairwell. In the quiet after midnight. He tapped the door, not to come in, just to let me know he hadn't vanished. Holmes crouched beside her. "He wanted you to find him." "I know," she whispered, but I kept looking away. The room fell still. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Then another sound, soft, direct. A single knock, not at the front nor the back, but from inside the wall behind the fireplace. Holmes rose in an instant, already scanning the joinery. "Watson, the crawl space." "There's a false panel behind the stove." We moved quickly. Holmes pressed along the edge of the baseboard until it gave with a click. A narrow door swung open, revealing a crawl space no taller than 4 feet, lined with dust and papers and string. And at the end of it, sitting cross-legged with his back to us, was a boy. His left hand bandaged, his right hand holding a charcoal stub. He did not turn, but he knocked once, slowly on the floor beside him. Holmes remained still, watching the boy with the intense quiet one reserves for creatures easily startled. The small figure at the end of the crawl space did not flinch, did not look back, only traced with his charcoal across the wall, the lines slow and circular. Another knock followed, light as a fingertip, tapping a memory. "His name," Holmes said softly, "is Thomas Lang. She never told anyone, but it's here written in silence, in soot, in grief." Marjorie crouched beside me at the entrance. "He won't speak," she whispered. "Not since he was 6, not since I stopped coming." Holmes removed his coat, folded it neatly and laid it on the floor before crawling in. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. The boy paused in his drawing, the charcoal mid-curve. His shoulders rose slightly, not in fear, but recognition. Holmes didn't speak. He took out the Queen of Hearts and placed it gently beside the child. Thomas stared at it. Then, after a long moment, he reached into his satchel and produced a second card, the King of Hearts torn at the top edge, water-stained. He set it down next to the Queen. Holmes exhaled. "Watson," he called without looking, "do you recall the brooch with the initials M.B.? Yes, it wasn't Marjorie Bell's. It was Marjorie and Boy. That's what he thought it stood for, that she wore it to remember him." The boy traced a line between the 2 cards with the charcoal. Then he held it out to Holmes, not saying a word, just offering the stub, like the final page of a letter. Holmes took it with care. "He's been writing the story for years," he said, "and he's only now given us the pen." Marjorie's voice trembled. "Can I speak to him?" Holmes crawled back, nodding once. "Only if you mean it." She entered slowly, hands on the floor, careful not to startle him. When she reached his side, she didn't speak right away. She placed her hand, trembling and whole, beside his bandaged one. "I'm sorry I left," she whispered. "I thought I was saving you, but I know now I was saving myself." The boy turned just slightly. His eyes were wide and wet, but he did not look afraid. He looked undecided, as though weighing something delicate. Then very gently, he knocked once on the floor beside her. She responded in kind. 2 knocks, then silence. Holmes and I waited outside the crawl space. When Marjorie emerged, her eyes were damp but calm. She looked at Holmes. "He'll come," she said. Holmes nodded. "Not today, but one day. You've left the door open." She looked down the corridor, her voice a whisper. "Will you tell them?" "I'll tell only what must be known," he replied, "and leave the rest in your care." Later, back on Baker Street, I found myself staring at the envelope he had placed on the mantel, the one containing both playing cards and the boy's final drawing. Holmes stood at the window, watching the rain draw slow lines down the glass. "I believe," he said, "that the quietest cases are often the most violent, not in action, but in memory. That boy committed no crime, and yet he lived under punishment." He turned to me, the gaslight catching the hollows under his eyes. "And yet he never once sought retribution, only recognition." I said nothing. There was nothing more to say. Holmes moved to his desk, opened his drawer, and withdrew a sealed envelope. "I've written to the child's guardian," he said. "Not Dunford, a Mrs. Goss in Ramsgate. She kept the boys safe before, and I believe she will again." He placed the envelope beside the Queen and King of Hearts. Then he turned and lit his pipe. The silence between us held not empty, but understood. The fire hissed softly. The floor gave one slow groan as the house settled into the night. And far below, somewhere in the city, a knock echoed against a door that had waited too long to be heard.